The stagecoach lurched violently over another rut in the dusty trail, and Eleanor Spencer pressed her trembling hand against her mouth, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her once again. She had been traveling for 3 weeks now, leaving Boston behind for the untamed territory of New Mexico, and somewhere between Kansas and this God-forsaken stretch of desert, her body had decided to betray her completely. "Miss, you are looking mighty peaked," the older woman sitting across from her said, concern etching deeper lines into her weathered face. "We should be reaching Lordsburg within the hour. You just hold on now." Eleanor nodded weakly, unable to form words. Her head pounded with such ferocity that even the dim light filtering through the coach windows felt like daggers piercing her skull. The fever had started 4 days ago, a slow burn that had gradually consumed her entire body. She had tried to hide it at first, embarrassed to be a burden to her fellow travelers, but by yesterday morning she could barely sit upright. The letter in her carpetbag seemed to mock her now. She had read it so many times she had memorized every word. "Seeking a respectable woman of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to relocate to New Mexico territory. I am a rancher of modest means but honest work. If you are hardy and true, we might build a good life together. Philip Emerson." Hardy. She had thought herself hardy when she had answered that advertisement, when she had sold her few possessions and bought the train tickets that would carry her west. Her parents were gone, victims of the cholera outbreak that had swept through Boston 2 years prior. Her brother had his own family to care for and could not support her indefinitely. The prospect of becoming a governess or seamstress, living in a cramped boarding house for the rest of her days, had seemed unbearable compared to the adventure that awaited in the West. But she had not anticipated this illness. She had not imagined arriving at her new home as a half-dead burden rather than the capable partner she had promised to be. The stagecoach driver's shout penetrated her fog of misery. "Lordsburg ahead." Eleanor tried to sit straighter, to smooth her traveling dress, to appear presentable, but her arms felt like lead weights. The world tilted dangerously, and she gripped the edge of the seat with what little strength remained in her fingers. The coach rolled to a stop in front of the general store, dust swirling around the wheels. Through the window, Eleanor could see a small cluster of buildings lining a wide dirt street. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the endless blue sky. It should have been beautiful. She should have felt excitement, hope, anticipation. Instead, she felt only the desperate need to lie down before she collapsed entirely. The door swung open, and the driver's weathered face appeared. "Miss Spencer, there's a gentleman here says he is Philip Emerson." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had both dreaded and longed for during the endless journey. She took a shaky breath and tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. The older woman caught her arm. "Easy now, dear. Let us help you." Together, the woman and the driver half carried Eleanor from the coach. The bright New Mexico sun hit her like a physical blow, and she would have fallen if strong hands had not suddenly caught her. "What in the hell happened?" a deep voice demanded. "Is she injured?" Through her blurred vision, Eleanor saw a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin. He wore a simple cotton shirt and worn denim trousers, a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention even through her delirium. They were a striking hazel, flecked with gold and filled with genuine concern rather than the disgust or anger she had feared. "Sick," she managed to whisper. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to arrive like this." "Sick how long?" Philip Emerson's hands were gentle as he steadied her, and she noticed how large they were, calloused from hard work but surprisingly careful. "For days," the older woman answered for her. "Fever and weakness. She has barely kept down water. Philip muttered something under his breath that Eleanor's swimming head could not quite catch. Then, with a decisiveness that cut through her confusion, he swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. "My horse is just there," he said to no one in particular. "Can someone bring her bags to the Emerson ranch, 5 miles north on the main road?" "I will see to it," the stage driver said. She was a good passenger, never complained once despite being sick as a dog. Eleanor wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, to maintain some shred of dignity, but her body had other ideas. She found herself leaning into Philip's chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart through his shirt. He smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, and somehow that simple earthiness was more comforting than anything she had experienced in weeks. He carried her to a large bay horse, and somehow managed to mount while still holding her, settling her across his lap as though he had done this 100 times before. Eleanor's eyes drifted closed as the horse began to move, the gentle rocking motion surprisingly soothing despite her nausea. "Stay with me now," Philip said, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Do not go falling asleep until I know what we are dealing with." "Trying," Eleanor murmured. "I am so sorry. This is not how I wanted to meet you. Life rarely goes according to plan. Can you tell me your symptoms?" Eleanor forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at his profile. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and a nose that looked like it might have been broken once. Not classically handsome, perhaps, but there was something solid and reassuring about his features. "Fever, headache, everything hurts, cannot keep food down." She paused, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. "I thought it would pass. Might be influenza. Might be something else. We have a doctor in town, but he is visiting his daughter in Silver City this week. I will have to do what I can myself." "You do not have to," Eleanor said, though even she could hear how weak her protest sounded. "You could send me back. I would understand. This is not what you agreed to." Philip glanced down at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with her illness. "You came all this way. The least I can do is make sure you do not die on my account. We will worry about the rest when you are well." The ride to the ranch passed in a blur of hot sun and swaying motion. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of the landscape. Vast stretches of grassland dotted with cattle, rocky outcroppings that looked like they had been there since the beginning of time. The sky so huge and blue, it seemed impossible. Finally, the horse turned down a path lined with cottonwood trees, and a house came into view. It was larger than Eleanor had expected, a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch and real glass windows. Outbuildings dotted the property, and she could see horses in a corral near what must be the barn. Philip dismounted with the same careful grace he had shown before, keeping her secure in his arms. He carried her up the porch steps and through the front door into a dim, blessedly cool interior. "The bedroom is this way," he said, more to himself than to her. He shouldered open a door and laid her gently on a large bed covered with a colorful quilt. Eleanor sank into the mattress with a sigh of relief, her body finally able to stop fighting to stay upright. "I am going to get some water and supplies," Philip said, already moving toward the door. "Do not try to get up." Eleanor could not have gotten up if her life depended on it. She let her eyes close just for a moment, and when she opened them again, Philip was back, setting a basin of water on the bedside table along with several clean cloths. "We need to get that fever down," he said, his tone businesslike now. "I am going to put cool compresses on your forehead and wrists. It might be uncomfortable." "Already uncomfortable," Eleanor managed, and was rewarded with a slight curve of his lips that might have been almost a smile. Philip dunked one of the cloths in the water and wrung it out. When he placed it on her forehead, Eleanor gasped at the shock of coolness, but after a moment the relief was overwhelming. He repeated the process with her wrists, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he positioned the compresses. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." Eleanor studied him as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression, the careful way he handled her. "You must think me terribly foolish, traveling all this way only to arrive half dead." "I think you are brave," Philip said simply. "Leaving everything you knew to come to a place you have never seen, to marry a man you have never met. That takes courage. Getting sick does not change that." His words settled something in Eleanor's chest that she had not realized was unsettled. She had spent the last 4 days not just fighting her illness, but fighting her own shame and fear of judgment. To hear him speak of bravery rather than foolishness was like cool water on a deeper kind of burning. "I should get you out of that traveling dress," Philip said, then immediately colored slightly. "I mean, you would be more comfortable in a nightgown. I will find something that belonged to my mother." "Your mother?" "She passed 5 years ago. Influenza, actually, during a particularly bad winter. My father followed her 6 months later. Heart just gave out, the doctor said, but I think he died of missing her." Philip stood, his expression distant. They had that kind of love, the kind that cannot survive being torn in half. He left the room before Eleanor could respond, leaving her to contemplate his words. What must it be like, she wondered, to love someone so completely that losing them meant losing yourself? Her own parents had cared for each other, certainly, but theirs had been a practical partnership, respectful but not particularly passionate. Philip returned with a simple white nightgown, worn soft from many washings. "I will step outside while you change. Call if you need help." But when Eleanor tried to sit up, tried to even lift her arms to unbutton her dress, the room spun violently. She made a small sound of distress, and Philip was back at her side immediately. "Easy," he said. "I will help. I promise to be respectful about it." Eleanor knew she should feel mortified, but she was too sick to care about propriety anymore. She nodded weakly, and Philip helped her sit up, supporting her with one arm while his other hand worked the buttons down the back of her dress. He was as careful and clinical as any doctor, his touch impersonal despite the intimacy of the situation. Getting the dress off required some maneuvering, and by the time he slipped the nightgown over her head and helped work her arms through the sleeves, Eleanor was shaking with exhaustion. But she had to admit she felt better without the restrictive traveling clothes. Philip eased her back down and pulled a light sheet over her. "Better. Much. Thank you for your kindness. I do not deserve it." "Everyone deserves kindness when they are sick," Philip said firmly. "Now, I am going to try to get some water in you. Just small sips." He helped her drink, patient when she could only manage tiny amounts, never showing frustration when she had to stop to let her stomach settle. When she finally could not take any more, he set the cup aside and refreshed the cool compresses. "You should rest now. I will check on you in an hour." "You have a ranch to run," Eleanor protested weakly. "You cannot sit here watching me sleep. I have hired hands to handle the daily work. Right now, my only job is making sure you recover." He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "Eleanor, that is your name, correct? The letter said Eleanor Spencer." "Yes, and you are Philip Emerson." "I am." "Well, Eleanor, I want you to know something. Whatever happens, whether you decide to stay after you recover or whether you want to return to Boston, I will not hold any of this against you. You did not ask to get sick. Life just happens sometimes." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, he was gone, pulling the door partially closed behind him. She lay in the dim room, listening to the sounds of the ranch drifting through the window, cattle lowing in the distance, the whinny of horses. men's voices calling to each other about work she could not imagine. She had thought she understood what she was agreeing to when she answered Philip's advertisement. A partnership, a practical arrangement that would benefit them both. She would gain security and a home. He would gain a wife to help run the household, perhaps to give him children someday. But lying in his mother's bed, wearing his mother's nightgown, having felt the gentleness in his hands and heard the understanding in his voice, Eleanor realized the situation was already more complicated than she had anticipated. This man was not just a means to an end. He was real, solid, kind in a way that made her chest ache with something she could not quite name. She drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with fragmented dreams. Her mother's face, the rolling motion of the stagecoach, strong arms catching her before she fell. When she woke, the light had changed and Philip was back at her bedside, replacing the compresses with freshly cooled ones. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice rough. "About 2 hours. How do you feel?" Eleanor considered the question. "The same, perhaps slightly less like death." That almost smile flickered across Philip's face again. "Progress. I brought some broth. Do you think you could manage a few spoonfuls?" Her stomach churned at the thought, but Eleanor knew she needed to try. Philip helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, then settled into a chair beside the bed with a bowl of golden liquid that steamed gently. "Small bites," he instructed, dipping the spoon. "We will take it slow." He fed her like a child, patient and steady, never rushing despite how long it took. The broth was simple but good, salty and warm, and to Eleanor's relief, her stomach accepted it without immediate rebellion. She managed perhaps a dozen spoonfuls before exhaustion overwhelmed her again. "That is good," Philip said, setting the bowl aside. "Better than I hoped. You rest again. I will be nearby if you need anything." The pattern repeated itself through the long afternoon and into the evening. Eleanor would sleep fitfully, wake to find Philip there with water or broth or fresh compresses, then drift off again. He never seemed impatient, never made her feel like a burden. His hands were always gentle, his voice always calm. As night fell and the room grew dark, Eleanor woke to find Philip lighting a lamp. The warm glow pushed back the shadows, and she realized with a start that he looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his movements were slower than they had been that morning. "You should sleep," she said. "You have been caring for me all day. I will sleep later. Your fever is still high. I do not want to leave you alone." "Philip." She waited until he looked at her, really looked at her. "I will be all right for a few hours. You need rest too." He scrubbed a hand over his face and she could see him considering her words. Finally, he nodded. "The door will be open. If you need anything, anything at all you call out, I will hear you. I promise." He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room back into darkness softened only by moonlight through the window, and Eleanor heard him cross to the door. But instead of moving down the hall as she had expected, she heard the creak of floorboards just outside her room and the sound of him settling against the wall. He was going to sleep right there, close enough to hear if she called, refusing to go far despite his own exhaustion. Something in Eleanor's chest cracked open at the realization. She barely knew this man. They had exchanged a handful of words, nothing more. Yet he was sacrificing his own comfort, his own rest, to ensure her well-being, not out of obligation or duty, but from simple human kindness. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, though whether from weakness or emotion, she could not say. She had been so alone for so long, first after her parents' deaths, then during the endless journey west. To suddenly have someone caring for her, putting her needs above his own, was overwhelming in its tenderness. She fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in days, her dreams were peaceful. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find sunlight streaming through the window and Philip back in the chair beside her bed, a cup of coffee cradled in his hands. He looked marginally more rested, though she suspected he had not gotten much sleep against the hallway wall. "Morning," he said. "Your fever broke during the night. You are still warm, but nothing like yesterday." Eleanor took stock of her body and realized he was right. The crushing pain in her head had diminished to a dull ache, and though she felt weak as a kitten, the bone-deep wrongness had eased. "I feel better," she said, surprised. "Truly better. Good. That is very good." The relief in Philip's voice was unmistakable. "I was starting to worry we might need to send for the doctor in Silver City despite the distance, but if the fever is breaking, you should continue to improve." He helped her drink more water and coaxed her into eating some dry toast, which her stomach accepted grudgingly but without revolt. As he worked, Eleanor found herself studying him more closely, taking in details she had been too sick to notice before. He was perhaps 30 years old, give or take a year, with the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors. His hands, as she had noted before, were large and work-roughened, but they moved with a careful precision that suggested he was used to handling things that required a delicate touch despite his size. When he smiled, small lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he did it often, though he had been serious during her illness. "You are staring," Philip said mildly, not looking up from the toast he was spreading with butter. Eleanor felt heat creep into her cheeks. "I apologize. I was just thinking that I should know what my potential husband looks like, since I have seen very little beyond the inside of my own eyelids since I arrived." "Fair point." Philip looked up and met her eyes directly. "What do you think?" The question was asked lightly, but Eleanor sensed genuine curiosity beneath it. She considered lying, offering some polite platitude, but something about Philip's straightforward manner made her want to match his honesty. "I think you look like a man who works hard and keeps his word. I think you have kind eyes and gentle hands. I think I was fortunate that you were the one who answered my letter and not someone else." Philip's expression shifted, something warm and surprised flickering across his features. "I think I was the fortunate one," he said quietly. "Not every woman would have had the courage to come all this way. And certainly not every woman would be as gracious as you have been about arriving sick and being cared for by a stranger." "You do not feel like much of a stranger anymore," Eleanor said, then immediately wondered if she had been too forward. But Philip just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "No, I suppose you do not feel like a stranger to me either." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new, until the sound of horses and male voices outside broke the spell. Philip stood and moved to the window. "My foreman and some of the hands. I should go speak with them about today's work." He turned back to Eleanor. "Will you be all right for a little while?" "I will be fine. Go, run your ranch. I have monopolized enough of your time." Philip hesitated at the door. "It was not a monopoly if I gave the time freely." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor to contemplate the quiet warmth his words had kindled in her chest. She lay back against the pillows, feeling more alert than she had in days despite her lingering weakness. Through the window, she could hear Philip's voice, calm and authoritative as he spoke with his men. Someone laughed at something he said, and Eleanor found herself smiling at the sound. She must have dozed off again because the next thing she knew, the sun had moved significantly across the sky, and there were new sounds in the house. The clatter of pots, the smell of something cooking. Eleanor's stomach, which had rejected nearly everything for days, actually rumbled with interest. The bedroom door opened, and a woman appeared, perhaps 60 years old with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a tray laden with bowls and cups. "So you are awake," the woman said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "Good. I am Martha Daniels. My husband James is Philip's foreman. Philip sent word this morning that he needed someone to help care for you so he could get back to work. I brought soup and fresh bread." Eleanor struggled to sit up, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Daniels. I apologize for the trouble." "No trouble. Philip is a good man, and anyone he cares enough to help is worth helping." Martha set the tray on the bedside table and began arranging things with efficient movements. "Now, let us see about getting some proper food into you. You are thin as a rail." Under Martha's no-nonsense care, Eleanor found herself eating more than she had in days. The soup was thick with vegetables and tender pieces of chicken, the bread still warm from the oven. Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation, filling Eleanor in on the ranch and the people who worked there. "Philip runs about 2,000 head of cattle," Martha said, refilling Eleanor's water cup. "Good breeding stock. His father started the ranch 30 years ago with nothing but determination and a small herd, built it up to something substantial. Philip has been managing it mostly on his own since his father passed, though James helps with the day-to-day operations." "It must be difficult, handling everything alone," Eleanor said. "It is. A ranch this size needs a woman's touch in the house, and Philip needs a partner to share the burdens with." Martha gave Eleanor a measured look. "I will not pretend to understand the whole mail-order bride situation, but I will say this. Philip is one of the finest men I have ever known. Honest, hard-working, treats his people fair. He deserves someone who will appreciate him." The message was clear. Eleanor nodded. "I intend to do my best to be a good wife to him if he still wants to marry me after all this." "Oh, he will want to marry you," Martha said with certainty. "I saw how he looked when he came to our house this morning. Man was beside himself with worry. That is not how someone looks when they are thinking about backing out of an arrangement." Eleanor felt that warmth kindle in her chest again. She wanted to ask exactly how Philip had looked, what he had said, but pride kept the questions locked behind her teeth. Martha stayed through the afternoon, helping Eleanor wash up and change into a fresh nightgown, brushing out her tangled hair until it shone. By the time Philip returned that evening, Eleanor was propped up against the pillows, feeling almost human again. "You have color in your cheeks," Philip said, stopping in the doorway. "Martha's cooking must agree with you." "Everything agrees with me better than it did yesterday," Eleanor said. "Mrs. Daniels has been wonderful. She told me about the ranch. Nothing too scandalous, I hope." Philip came into the room and settled into his now customary chair. He looked tired again, dust coating his clothes and a streak of dirt across his jaw. But there was satisfaction in his expression, the contentment of a man who had put in a good day's work. "Only that you run 2,000 head of cattle and treat your people fairly. Hardly scandalous. Give Martha more time. She will find something to scandalize you with." Philip's tone was fond. "How are you feeling?" Truthfully, Eleanor considered the question. "Weak, tired, but better. The fever seems to have truly broken. I think I will recover." "Thank God for that." Philip leaned back in the chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I was more worried than I wanted to admit." "Why?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. "You do not know me. I am just a woman who answered an advertisement." Philip was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the window where the last light of day was fading into dusk. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When my mother was dying, she made me promise something. She said life was too short to waste on anything less than genuine feeling. She told me to wait for someone who made me want to be better, someone I could respect and admire, not just someone to fill a space in the house." He looked back at Eleanor. "I placed that advertisement 6 months ago. Do you know how many responses I got?" Eleanor shook her head. 14. Most of them were perfectly nice letters from perfectly respectable women, but yours was different. You wrote about wanting adventure, about being willing to work hard, about hoping to build something meaningful. You did not ask what I could give you. You asked what we could create together. That struck me as the words of someone special. Eleanor's breath caught. She remembered writing that letter late at night, pouring her hopes and fears onto the page, trying to be honest about who she was and what she wanted. She had not expected anyone to truly see her in those words. "I worried I had been too forward," she admitted. "Too bold for a woman." "You were honest. That is worth more than any amount of false modesty." Philip leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "So when you stepped off that coach looking half dead but still trying to apologize for inconveniencing me, I knew I had been right about you. You are brave and strong, Eleanor Spencer. Getting sick does not change that." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes again, but this time she did not try to hide them. "I was so afraid you would send me back, that I had ruined everything before it even began." "No, you did not ruin anything." Philip reached out and took her hand, his large palm warm and calloused against her skin. "If anything, these past 2 days have shown me more about who you are than a dozen letters could have. You are gracious even when you feel terrible. You worry about being a burden even when you can barely sit up. You push yourself to get better instead of wallowing in misery. You saw me at my absolute worst," Eleanor pointed out, though she did not pull her hand away. "True, and I liked what I saw anyway." The simple honesty of the statement struck Eleanor speechless. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was slowly, perhaps unconsciously, stroking across her knuckles. Such a small gesture, but it made her feel more seen and cherished than any grand romantic declaration could have. "Philip," she said softly, "I want you to know that I meant everything I wrote in my letter. I want to build something real here. I want to be a true partner to you, not just in name but in every way. I know we have much to learn about each other, but I am willing to do the work if you are." "I am more than willing," Philip said, "but I think we should take our time. Get to know each other properly before we rush into marriage. What do you think?" Eleanor felt relief wash through her. She had been prepared to marry him immediately if that was what he wanted, but the idea of having time to truly build a foundation for their relationship was infinitely more appealing. "I think that sounds perfect." Philip smiled, a real smile this time that transformed his entire face. "Good. Then we have an understanding. You focus on getting well and we will figure out the rest as we go." Over the following days, Eleanor's health continued to improve. The weakness gradually faded, replaced by returning strength. Martha visited daily, bringing food and gossip and practical wisdom about life on a New Mexico ranch. Eleanor learned that Martha and James had worked for Philip's father for 15 years and had stayed on after his death, loyal to the family and to Philip personally. The boy was only 25 when he inherited this whole operation, Martha told Eleanor one afternoon, as she helped her into a dress for the first time since arriving. "Younger than most men when they take on such responsibility, but he never faltered. Just rolled up his sleeves and did what needed doing." Eleanor fastened the buttons with fingers that still felt clumsy but were growing steadier each day. "He seems very capable. Capable and then some, but lonely too, though he would never admit it. This ranch is his whole life. He needed someone to share it with." Martha gave Eleanor a meaningful look. "I think he has found that someone." By the end of the first week, Eleanor was well enough to leave the bedroom. Philip gave her a tour of the house, pointing out the kitchen with its large wood stove, the sitting room with comfortable leather furniture and shelves lined with books, the dining room with a table that could seat 10. "My mother loved to have people over," Philip said, running his hand along the back of one of the chairs. She said a house was meant to be filled with laughter and good company. After she died, it has been quiet, too quiet. Perhaps we could change that, Eleanor suggested. Once I am fully recovered, we could have Martha and James over for dinner. I would like to repay their kindness. Philip's face lit up. My mother would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person was in how they treated those who had been kind to them. He showed her the rest of the house, including a room he used as an office, filled with ledgers and papers documenting the ranch's operations. Eleanor paused in the doorway, taking in the organized chaos. This is where all the real work of running a ranch happens, Philip said. Tracking breeding records, managing finances, planning for the seasons. The hands do the physical labor, but someone has to ensure it all makes sense on paper. Could you teach me? Eleanor asked. About the business side, I mean. I was always good with numbers. In Boston, I helped my father with his bookkeeping before he died. Philip looked at her with surprise and what might have been admiration. You want to learn about ranch management. I want to be useful. If we are to be partners, I should understand all aspects of what we are doing, should I not? Most women would have no interest in ledgers and breeding records. Eleanor lifted her chin. I am not most women. That smile flickered across Philip's face again, stronger this time. No, you certainly are not. That evening they sat together in the sitting room after supper. Eleanor in one of the leather chairs, Philip in another, a companionable silence settling between them as the fire crackled. It was the first time they had simply existed in the same space without the urgency of her illness driving the interaction. Tell me about Boston, Philip said eventually. What was your life like there? Eleanor considered the question, surprised to find the memories no longer hurt quite as much as they once had. Busy, crowded, everyone always rushing somewhere. My father was a clerk, my mother took in sewing. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable. Then the cholera came, and within a month, both my parents were gone. My brother took me in, but his wife had just had their third child and the house was already cramped. I tried to help to earn my keep, but I felt like I was just in the way. I am sorry. Losing both parents at once must have been devastating. It was, but in a strange way it also freed me. I had always dreamed of adventure, of seeing more of the world than just the same Boston streets. When I was a girl, my father used to read me stories about the West, about mountains and deserts and endless skies. I never thought I would actually get to see it. Eleanor looked out the window at the darkening landscape. But here I am. Any regrets? Eleanor met Philip's eyes. Not a single one. The next day, Philip had work that would keep him away from the house until evening, checking on the herd in the northern pastures. Eleanor, feeling restless after days of convalescence, decided to explore the area around the house. The ranch was beautiful in a stark, dramatic way that was nothing like the green landscapes of the East. The land rolled away in all directions, brown and gold under the bright sun, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees. The mountains in the distance seemed to change color with the light, purple and red and gold by turns. Eleanor made her way to the barn, curious to see the horses she had heard but not yet met. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of hay and animals. Several horses poked their heads over stall doors, regarding her with mild interest. You must be Miss Spencer. Eleanor turned to find a young man, perhaps 22 or 23, leaning against a post. He had sandy hair and an easy smile, and he tipped his hat politely. I am Thomas Wright, one of the hands. Philip said you were sick when you arrived. Glad to see you are up and about. Thank you. I am glad to be up and about as well. These must be the horses, some of them. We have about 20 altogether. These are the ones we use for everyday work. Thomas walked over to one of the stalls and patted the nose of a gray mare. "This is Daisy, gentle as they come. Philip said once you were well, you would probably want a horse to ride. Daisy would be perfect for you." Eleanor had ridden as a child, though it had been years. The idea of being able to explore the ranch on horseback was appealing. "She is lovely. I could saddle her up for you now if you want to take a short ride, just around the yard, nothing strenuous." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. It felt good to make a decision for herself, to do something active after days of being an invalid. Thomas was efficient, and within minutes, Daisy was saddled and ready. Eleanor accepted Thomas's help mounting, settling into the saddle with a feeling of rightness. The mare stood patient and steady as Eleanor adjusted the reins. "Just take it easy," Thomas advised. "If you start feeling tired, come right back." Eleanor walked Daisy around the yard, relearning the rhythm of riding. The mare was indeed gentle, responsive to even the lightest touch. By the time Eleanor had completed several circuits, she felt exhilarated rather than exhausted. She was dismounting when the sound of approaching hooves made her turn. Philip was riding into the yard on his bay, and the look on his face was one of surprise and pleasure. "You are riding," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Thomas was kind enough to saddle Daisy for me. I hope that is all right. I did not mean to overstep." "Overstep? Eleanor, this is going to be your home. You do not need permission to ride one of the horses." Philip came closer, his eyes searching her face. "But are you sure you are ready? You have been very sick." "I feel fine, truly. A little weak still, but nothing that rest will not cure, and it felt wonderful to be doing something active instead of lying in bed." Philip nodded, though Eleanor could see the concern lingering in his expression. "Just promise me you will not push yourself too hard. Recovery takes time." "I promise." Thomas had been tactfully checking the horses in their stalls, giving them a semblance of privacy, but now he emerged to take the horses and see them settled. Philip placed a hand on the small of Eleanor's back, guiding her toward the house. "I am glad to see you feeling better," he said. "You had me worried for a while there." "I believe I had myself worried too," Eleanor admitted. "I have never been that sick before. It was frightening to feel so helpless." "You were never helpless. Sick, yes, but you never stopped fighting." Philip opened the door for her. "That takes strength." Inside, Martha had left fresh bread and a pot of stew for their supper. They ate together at the large dining table, and Eleanor tried to imagine what it would be like to fill the other chairs with guests, to bring life and laughter back to this house that had been quiet for too long. "You are thinking very hard about something," Philip observed. "I was thinking about your mother and how she liked to fill this house with people. I was thinking I would like to do the same. We will. Give it time." Philip paused, then added, "I have been thinking about something too. About us and our arrangement." Eleanor set down her spoon, sudden nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "Oh, I know we agreed to take our time getting to know each other before marrying. I still think that is the right choice, but I want you to know that my intentions are serious. I want this to work, Eleanor. I want you to be happy here." The sincerity in his voice made Eleanor's chest tighten. "I want it to work too, and I am happy here, Philip, happier than I expected to be. Even after arriving sick and having a stranger nurse you through a fever. Especially because of that. You showed me exactly who you are in those days. Someone kind and patient and caring. Someone I could trust with my life because you already saved it." Philip reached across the table and took her hand, just as he had done in her sick room. "You are making it very difficult to take things slowly." Eleanor felt heat creep into her cheeks, but she did not look away. "Is that such a bad thing?" "Not bad, just complicated." Philip's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I do not want to rush you. I do not want you to feel obligated because I helped you when you were sick. I do not feel obligated. I feel grateful, yes, but more than that, I feel drawn to you. These past days, getting to know you, seeing how you run this ranch and treat the people who work for you, learning about your parents and their love for each other. It has all made me want to be part of this life even more. Philip stood and came around the table, drawing Eleanor to her feet. They stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Eleanor Spencer, would you do me the honor of truly courting you? Not just as part of our arrangement, but because I genuinely want to know everything about you. Your hopes and dreams, your fears and joys, all the little pieces that make you who you are. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, I would like that very much. Philip lifted his hand and gently cupped her cheek, his palm rough but warm against her skin. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might kiss her, and she realized with a start that she wanted him to. But instead, he just held her face in his hand, his eyes searching hers as though memorizing every detail. "You are remarkable," he said softly. "I think I started falling for you the moment you apologized for being sick, as though arriving half dead was some kind of social faux pas." Eleanor laughed, the sound breathless. "I was trying to make a good impression." "You did. You made the best possible impression. You showed me you were real, human, vulnerable but strong, perfect exactly as you are." This time, when he leaned down, Eleanor rose up on her toes to meet him. The kiss was soft and careful, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm, slightly chapped from the dry air, and the gentleness in the touch made Eleanor feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. When they parted, both were breathing a little faster, both wearing slight smiles that spoke of wonder and discovery. "I should probably not have done that," Philip said, though he made no move to step away. "We are supposed to be taking things slow. Some things cannot be rushed or slowed. They just are." Eleanor surprised herself with her boldness, but it felt right, true. "And I think this is one of those things." Philip rested his forehead against hers, his hand settling on her waist. "You keep surprising me. Good. Life would be boring otherwise." They stood like that for a long moment, simply being close, feeling the newness and rightness of what was developing between them. When they finally separated and returned to their meal, something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer strangers following through on a practical arrangement. They were two people genuinely falling for each other, drawn together by circumstances, but staying together by choice. The following weeks settled into a pattern that felt comfortable and right. Philip worked the ranch during the day, often riding out with the hands to check the herd or mend fences, or handle the 1,000 small tasks that kept the operation running. Eleanor spent her time learning the house and the rhythm of ranch life. Martha taught her how to cook for working men, hearty meals that would fuel long days of physical labor. She showed Eleanor where the spring house was, how to preserve meat, how to make soap and candles, and all the practical necessities of life far from town. But Eleanor's favorite times were the evenings, when Philip would return dusty and tired, and they would sit together over supper and talk. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the time he accidentally let all the chickens out and spent 3 days trying to catch them again. Eleanor shared her own memories, the good and the bad, painting pictures of her life in Boston that seemed impossibly distant now. She told him about her dreams of adventure, her love of reading, her hope to someday have a family of her own. "How many children do you want?" Philip asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eleanor considered the question. "I always imagined at least 3, enough that they would have siblings to play with, to rely on as they grew. What about you?" Similar thoughts. I hated being an only child, always wanted brothers and sisters. Philip glanced at her, his expression soft. I think you would be an excellent mother. What makes you say that? The way you handle the barn cats. They have all decided you are their favorite person. You are patient and gentle, but also firm when needed. That seems like good qualities for raising children. Eleanor had indeed made friends with the half-wild barn cats, spending time earning their trust until even the wariest would come to be petted. I did not realize you had noticed. I notice everything about you. Philip said it simply, as though it were obvious, and Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. 3 weeks after her arrival, Philip asked if she would like to go into town with him. I need supplies, and I think it is time Lordsburg met you properly. If you are feeling up to it. Eleanor was more than ready. She had recovered her full strength and was eager to see more of the area that would be her home. She dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a deep blue cotton that Martha had helped her press, and pinned her hair up neatly. The ride into town took about an hour, and Eleanor used the time to study the landscape, pointing out interesting rock formations or unusual plants. Philip answered her questions with the easy knowledge of someone who had lived his whole life in this place, and Eleanor found herself charmed by his unself-conscious expertise. Lordsburg itself was larger than Eleanor had initially thought, with a main street lined with businesses, several side streets with houses, and a church with a white steeple that stood out against the blue sky. People were going about their business, women in bonnets carrying market baskets, men in work clothes discussing business on street corners. Philip helped her down from the horse, and immediately several people approached, curiosity plain on their faces. "Philip, is this your mail-order bride we heard about?" a portly man in a merchant's apron asked. "The one who arrived sick." "This is Eleanor Spencer," Philip said, his hand settling protectively on Eleanor's lower back. "Eleanor, this is Samuel Green, who owns the general store." "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Spencer. Welcome to Lordsburg. We heard you had a rough journey." "I did, but I am fully recovered now, thank you." Eleanor smiled, determined to make a good impression. "Your town is lovely. We like it well enough. You will have to come meet my wife, Clara. She has been dying of curiosity about you." This set the tone for the morning. Every shopkeeper, every person they passed on the street wanted to meet the woman who had come all the way from Boston to marry Philip Emerson. Eleanor shook hands and smiled until her face hurt, answering questions about her journey and her impressions of New Mexico. "You are handling this well," Philip murmured as they finally escaped into the general store. "Some of these people can be a bit overwhelming. They are just curious. And kind, mostly. I do not mind." Eleanor looked around the store, taking in the shelves stocked with everything from fabric to farm tools. "This is wonderful. We had nothing like this in one place in Boston. Out here, you need a little bit of everything under one roof." The next major town is Silver City, and that is a full day's ride. They spent an hour in the store, Philip consulting his list while Eleanor explored. She found a small section of books and was delighted to discover several titles she had not read. Philip appeared at her elbow and plucked them from her hands. "Consider them a gift. You will need something to do during the slow winter months." "Philip, you do not have to, I want to. Let me do this." The look in his eyes made Eleanor's protest die on her lips. She nodded, touched by his thoughtfulness. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon Philip had brought for the trip, a woman approached. She was perhaps Eleanor's age, pretty in a sharp-featured way, wearing a dress that was finer than anything else Eleanor had seen in town. "Philip Emerson, I heard you had your mail-order bride arrive. I wanted to meet her myself." There was something in the woman's tone that made Eleanor immediately wary, a brittle friendliness that did not quite reach her eyes. "Catherine Sterling," Philip said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Eleanor Spencer." "Eleanor, Catherine's father owns the largest ranch in the area aside from mine." "How lovely that you are settling for a rancher's life," Catherine said, looking Eleanor up and down in a way that was deliberately rude. I am sure Philip was quite desperate to arrange for a wife sight unseen. It must be difficult finding a woman willing to live so far from civilization. Eleanor felt anger spark in her chest, but before she could respond, Philip stepped between them. "Eleanor chose to come here because she is brave and adventurous, not because I was desperate. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate that she did. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a long ride home." He helped Eleanor into the wagon with pointed courtesy, then climbed up beside her. As they pulled away, Eleanor glanced back to see Catherine standing in the street, her expression sour. "Old friend of yours?" Eleanor asked, keeping her tone light despite her irritation. "Old annoyance?" Catherine had it in her head that she and I would marry someday, despite me never giving her any encouragement. When word got out that I had advertised for a wife, she was less than pleased. Philip glanced at Eleanor. "I am sorry about that. She can be spiteful." "I can handle spiteful." "I lived with my brother's wife for 6 months. Trust me, Catherine Sterling has nothing on Patricia Spencer when it comes to making someone feel unwelcome." Philip's lips quirked. "There is a story there. Many stories." "Remind me to tell you about the time she accidentally donated all my good dresses to charity because she thought I was taking up too much space in the wardrobe." "She did not." "She did. I got them back, but only by going to the church and explaining the situation to the pastor." "It was mortifying." Eleanor shook her head at the memory. "After that, I knew I had to find another option, which led to me answering your advertisement, which led to me being here now. So in a strange way, I suppose I should thank Patricia for being so terrible." "Remind me to send her a thank you note," Philip said dryly, and Eleanor laughed. The ride home was pleasant, the wagon rattling along the dusty road while Philip pointed out landmarks and shared more stories about the area. Eleanor found herself relaxing, the tension from the encounter with Catherine fading as she focused on the man beside her. He was so easy to be with, she realized. There was no pretense, no need to perform or be anyone other than who she was. Philip accepted her completely, quirks and all, and made her feel valued in a way she had never experienced. When they arrived back at the ranch, several of the hands came to help unload the wagon. Eleanor recognized Thomas and nodded a greeting. An older Mexican man she had not met before tipped his hat to her. "Miss Spencer, I am Manuel Rodriguez. I have been working here since Philip's father started this ranch. It is good to finally meet you properly." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Rodriguez." "I have heard you are the best horseman in 3 counties. Manuel's weathered face split into a grin. "Whoever told you that was very wise. It happens to be true." "That would be me," Philip said, carrying a crate past them. "And I have never known Manuel to be modest about his abilities." "Modesty is for people with things to be modest about," Manuel retorted, making Eleanor laugh. That evening, after supper, Philip asked Eleanor to walk with him. They strolled away from the house, following a path that wound between the corrals and out toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "I wanted to bring you here," Philip said when they reached the top of the rise. "This is my favorite spot on the whole property. You can see for miles." Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the view. The ranch buildings looked small from this height, neat and orderly against the vast landscape. Beyond them, the grassland stretched away to the mountains, and above, the sky was so huge and clear it seemed impossible. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I have never seen anything like it." "Neither had I until I climbed up here as a boy. Changed my whole perspective on the world." Philip came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "My father brought me here the day before he died. Told me this land was not just property, it was legacy. A trust to be cared for and passed down. That is a heavy responsibility for one person. It is, but I hope it will not always be just one person." Philip turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I know we said we would take time, get to know each other properly before making any permanent decisions. But I find myself wanting to move forward to make this real. You have been here almost a month now. In that time, you have become essential to me. I cannot imagine this place without you anymore." Eleanor's heart began to race. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I am certain of it. I love your courage and your curiosity. I love how you handle the cats and learn everything Martha teaches you and ask 100 questions about the ranch. I love how you stood up to Catherine Sterling without flinching, and how you laugh at Manuel's terrible jokes. I love everything about you, and I want you to be my wife. Truly my wife, not just because of an advertisement, but because I choose you and you choose me." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming joy. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you when you carried me into this house and promised to take care of me. When you sat by my bedside and fed me broth, and never once made me feel like I was a burden. You showed me who you were before I even had a chance to put on airs or pretend to be someone I was not. And the man I saw was someone worth loving." Philip cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "Marry me. Not because you traveled all this way, not because of any arrangement, but because you want to build a life with me." "Yes," Eleanor said, the word coming out somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her then, and it was different from that first careful kiss in the dining room. This was deeper, more certain, full of promise and passion. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she felt, all the love and hope and joy that had been building in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, both grinning like fools. "How soon can we arrange the wedding?" Philip asked. "As soon as you like. I have no family to invite, no big plans to make. I just want to be your wife. Then we will go to town tomorrow and speak with the preacher. If he is available, we could marry this week." Eleanor laughed, giddy with happiness. "What happened to taking our time? Some things cannot be rushed or slowed. They just are," Philip said, throwing her own words back at her. "And I think our love is one of those things." They stood on the rise until full dark fell, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future they would build together. They discussed children and how they would run the ranch as partners. They made plans and dreamed dreams, and by the time they walked back to the house hand in hand, Eleanor felt like she was floating. Martha was delighted when they shared the news the next morning, immediately declaring that she would organize everything. "No point in a big fuss, but we will do this properly," she announced. "Eleanor needs a new dress, something special. And we should have at least a small celebration after the ceremony. Nothing fancy, just the ranch hands and a few folks from town." "Martha, you do not have to go to so much trouble," Eleanor protested. "Nonsense. You only get married once if you are lucky. We are going to make it an occasion to remember." They rode into town that very day, Philip and Eleanor both, to speak with Reverend Thomas at the small white church. The Reverend was a kindly man in his 60s who had known Philip since he was born. "I would be honored to perform the ceremony," he said after Philip explained what they wanted. "How does this Saturday suit you? That gives us 4 days to prepare, long enough to be proper but not so long you are waiting around anxiously. Saturday would be perfect, Eleanor agreed. As word spread through town about the upcoming wedding, people Eleanor had barely met stopped to offer congratulations. Even Catherine Sterling managed a tight smile when their paths crossed outside the general store, though her good wishes sounded forced. "I suppose I should thank you," Catherine said stiffly. "If Philip was determined to marry someone, at least you seem respectable enough." "How generous of you," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice pleasant through sheer force of will. Then, because she could not quite help herself, she added, "I hope someday you find someone who makes you as happy as Philip makes me." Catherine's expression suggested this was unlikely, but she nodded and moved away, leaving Eleanor feeling like she had won some small victory. The days before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Martha took Eleanor to the dressmaker, a talented woman named Rose Chen who had settled in Lordsburg 5 years ago. Rose created a beautiful dress in pale cream silk with delicate blue embroidery at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Philip spent his time ensuring the ranch would run smoothly even while he took a few days away from work. James would handle things, he assured Eleanor, leaving them free to focus on their new marriage. On Saturday morning, Eleanor woke early, too excited to sleep. Martha arrived at dawn to help her prepare, bringing wildflowers she had picked for a bouquet. "You look beautiful," Martha said as she fastened the last button on the dress. "Philip is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Eleanor said, meaning it with her whole heart. The ceremony was held in the small church, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The pews were filled with ranch hands and townspeople, all there to witness the union. Eleanor walked down the aisle alone, having no one to give her away, but it did not feel lonely. It felt independent, a choice she was making for herself. Philip waited at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her with such love and wonder that Eleanor's breath caught. She had never felt more certain of anything than she did in that moment, walking toward him, toward their future. Reverend Thomas conducted a simple but meaningful ceremony. They spoke traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. When Philip slipped a gold ring onto her finger, his hands shook slightly, betraying his emotion. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said, and Philip did, sweetly and thoroughly, while the congregation erupted in applause. They emerged from the church as husband and wife, showered with rice and good wishes. A celebration had been set up at the ranch, tables laden with food, a small band ready to play music. As the sun set, people danced and laughed and toasted the happy couple. Eleanor danced with Philip, with James, with Manuel, with seemingly every man there. Philip danced with Martha and Rose Chen and even briefly with a scowling Catherine Sterling, who had attended with her father. But his eyes always found Eleanor, his smile always reserved especially for her. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Philip pulled Eleanor aside. "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Emerson." Eleanor loved the sound of her new name. "More than ready." He swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home while she laughed and protested that she could walk perfectly well. "Tradition," Philip said, setting her down gently in their bedroom. "And I have been wanting an excuse to carry you again since that first day." "You can carry me any time you like now," Eleanor pointed out. "I intend to take you up on that." They came together with a mixture of eagerness and tenderness, learning each other in new ways, building on the foundation of respect and genuine affection they had already established. There was laughter mixed with passion, whispered words and tender touches, and Eleanor had never felt more complete. Afterward, lying in Philip's arms with her head on his chest, Listening to the steady thump of his heart, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. The sickness that had terrified her now seemed like a blessing in disguise. It had stripped away all pretense, all carefully constructed facades, leaving only truth between them. "What are you thinking?" Philip asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am grateful." "For what?" "For getting sick. For you nursing me back to health. For having the chance to really know you before we married. If I had arrived healthy, we might have rushed into the wedding without building this foundation first. We might have just gone through the motions of an arrangement." Philip pulled her closer. "I like to think we would have found our way to this eventually, but I am grateful for how it happened too. I got to see the real you right from the start. No pretending, no hiding. Just Eleanor, brave and true and absolutely perfect. Not perfect, I have plenty of flaws." "Perfect for me then. How is that?" Eleanor tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "I can accept that." They lay together in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night drifting through the window. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness. Horses shuffled in the barn. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods. "Tell me your dreams," Philip said. "Everything you hope for our future." Eleanor thought for a moment. "I want this house full of children and laughter like your mother wanted. I want to learn every aspect of the ranch, to be a true partner in building something lasting. I want to grow old with you, watching our children grow and have children of their own. I want Sunday dinners with friends and quiet evenings reading together. I want a life that matters, built on love and hard work and honest feeling." "That sounds perfect to me. I promise to spend the rest of my life making those dreams come true." "And what are your dreams?" Philip was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, this. What we have right now is everything I have ever wanted. Someone to share this life with, to make it all mean something. You are my dream, Eleanor." The simple honesty of it made Eleanor's throat tight with emotion. She had come west looking for adventure and security, practical things that made logical sense. She had not expected to find this consuming, all-encompassing love. But here it was, real and solid and more precious than anything she had imagined. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to navigate sharing space and decisions and life with another person. But it was also wonderful in ways Eleanor had not anticipated. She loved waking up next to Philip every morning. Loved sitting across from him at breakfast while they planned their day. Loved the way he would come find her for a kiss in the middle of his work, dirty and sweaty and completely unconcerned about propriety in their own home. Eleanor threw herself into learning the ranch business, spending hours in the office going through ledgers with Philip, asking questions until she understood every aspect of the operation. She learned about breeding lines and market prices, about when to sell and when to hold. Philip was a patient teacher, never condescending, always treating her input as valuable. "You have a good head for this," he said one afternoon as they went over the finances. "Better than me in some ways. You see patterns I miss. Just a different perspective. You are so deep in the day-to-day that you miss the broader trends sometimes." Working together, they made the ranch more efficient and profitable. Eleanor suggested changes to the bookkeeping system that saved hours of work. She corresponded with buyers in other territories, negotiating better prices. Philip handled the physical labor and management of the hands, but increasingly he consulted Eleanor on major decisions. "We are a good team," he told her one evening as they reviewed the quarterly results. "The numbers were strong, the ranch thriving. I could not do this without you." "Yes, you could, but it is more fun doing it together." Philip pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "Everything is more fun with you." 6 months into their marriage, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Philip, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she finally shared the news one evening over supper, his reaction was everything she could have wished for. "A baby," he breathed, his eyes going wide. "Truly, truly. By my calculations, sometime in late spring." Philip stood so fast his chair nearly tipped over. He crossed to Eleanor and pulled her to her feet, holding her carefully as though she might break. "This is the best news. The absolute best news." "You are happy then?" "Happy, Eleanor, I am over the moon, delirious, completely overjoyed." He pressed his forehead to hers. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Martha fussed over Eleanor constantly, insisting she rest more and not overdo things. Philip became almost comically protective, hovering whenever Eleanor did anything more strenuous than sitting down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor protested when he tried to carry her up the stairs one evening. "Humor me. I will calm down eventually." "I doubt that." But despite the hovering, it was a happy time. They spent the winter months preparing a nursery, painting the small room next to their bedroom, and filling it with a cradle Philip built himself. Martha organized the ranch women to sew tiny clothes and blankets. Even the hands seemed excited, making plans to teach the baby to ride as soon as they were old enough. In early April, as the desert began to bloom with spring wildflowers, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when both she and Philip were frightened. But Martha had attended dozens of births and knew what she was doing. After nearly 20 hours of labor, Eleanor delivered a healthy baby boy. "A son," Philip breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held the tiny bundle. "We have a son." They named him Thomas James Emerson, after the reverend who married them and the foreman who had become like family. The baby had Philip's hazel eyes and Eleanor's dark hair, and both parents immediately agreed he was the most beautiful child ever born. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Eleanor had never known she could love someone so much it physically hurt. Every smile, every small sound Thomas made was a miracle. Philip was a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby at night when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, completely besotted with his son. "I did not think I could love you more than I already did," Philip told Eleanor one night as they watched Thomas sleep. "But seeing you with our son, I fall in love with you all over again every single day." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling complete in a way she had not known was possible. "We made something beautiful together, something real and lasting. We did, and we are just getting started." The years that followed brought more children. 2 years after Thomas, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Mary Margaret, with her father's smile and her mother's quick mind. 3 years after that, twin boys arrived unexpectedly, keeping everyone on their toes. They named them Peter and Paul, and from the moment they could crawl, they were into everything. The house was never quiet anymore, always filled with the sounds of children playing and laughing and occasionally fighting. It was exactly what Eleanor had dreamed of, exactly what Philip's mother had wanted for this place. The dining room table was full at every meal, and love permeated every corner of the home. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management. Philip expanded the herd, buying better breeding stock. Eleanor established connections with buyers in California and Colorado, ensuring they always got top prices. They hired more hands as the operation grew, good men who were loyal and hardworking. Manuel became like a grandfather to the children, teaching them to ride and rope, filling their heads with stories. Martha helped Eleanor with the endless work of running a household full of children, never complaining about the additional labor. Eleanor sometimes thought about her life in Boston, about the cramped house where she had felt like a burden, about the uncertain future she had faced. It all seemed like a dream now, something that had happened to someone else entirely. "Any regrets?" Philip asked one evening. They had stolen a rare moment alone on the porch while the older children watched the twins. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Not a single one. You. Only that I did not find you sooner. We could have had even more years together." Eleanor leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "We have the rest of our lives. That is enough." And it was. They watched their children grow, strong and healthy and loved beyond measure. Thomas showed an early interest in the ranch business, following his father everywhere, asking endless questions. Mary had her mother's head for numbers and could tally figures faster than most adults by the time she was 8. The twins were wild and free-spirited, constantly getting into mischief, but with such charm they rarely faced consequences. As the children got older, Eleanor and Philip found new rhythms in their marriage. They still worked the ranch together, but now they had help from Thomas and eventually Mary. They had time for just the two of them again. Long rides across the property, quiet evenings reading together, moments of intimacy that deepened with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Philip took Eleanor back to the rise overlooking the ranch. It was the same spot where he had proposed, where they had dreamed together about their future. "Look what we built," he said, gesturing at the ranch below. It had grown significantly, more buildings, more corrals, more life. "Everything we talked about that night, we made it real." "We did," Eleanor agreed. "Together. Always together." Philip pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding day. "I love you, Eleanor Emerson, more now than I did 10 years ago, which I would have said was impossible." "Love grows," Eleanor said. "That is what makes it magical. It does not stay static. It expands and deepens and becomes more than you ever imagined it could be." They stood on the rise as the sun set. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by an advertisement in a newspaper, who had built a life and a love that would last generations. Their children would inherit not just the ranch, but the legacy of what real partnership looked like. What it meant to choose each other every day, through sickness and health, through challenges and triumphs. Eleanor thought about that scared woman who had arrived sick and terrified, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to worry, that the man waiting for her would be everything she had hoped for and more, that the life awaiting her would exceed her wildest dreams. But then again, maybe that woman had known somehow, even in her delirium. Maybe that was why she had held onto consciousness long enough to apologize, to try to make a good impression despite feeling like death. Some part of her must have recognized that this man, this place, this future was worth fighting for. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. Thomas married a sweet girl from Silver City and built a house on the northern edge of the property. Mary shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to study business in Denver, though she promised to come back and help run the ranch. The twins grew into fine young men, different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. Philip's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines appeared around Eleanor's eyes from squinting into the sun. They moved a little slower than they once did, but their love never dimmed. If anything, it burned brighter, tempered by time and experience into something unbreakable. They became grandparents, first to Thomas's daughter, then to a steady stream of grandchildren as their other children married and started families. The dining room table had to be expanded twice to accommodate everyone at holiday dinners. The house was full of noise and life, and exactly the kind of love Philip's mother had dreamed of, On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought the entire town to the ranch. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and retold about the mail-order bride who had arrived sick and the rancher who had fallen hard while nursing her back to health. "We have become a legend," Eleanor told Philip as they danced together under the stars. "We have become a love story," Philip corrected. "The kind my parents had, the kind that lasts. The kind that is worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty." Philip pulled her closer, and they swayed together to the music, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had built. Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of sage and leather that would forever mean home, that would forever mean Philip. She had left Boston seeking adventure and found love, had left everything familiar and discovered where she truly belonged, had answered an advertisement and found her soulmate. Life rarely followed the path you expected, but sometimes, if you were very lucky, it led you exactly where you needed to be. As the party continued around them, as their grandchildren ran shrieking with joy through the house that had once been too quiet, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, the stagecoach ride that had nearly killed her, the illness that had shown her Philip's true character, the love that had grown from those humble, difficult beginnings into something that would outlast them both. "Thank you," she whispered against Philip's chest as they danced. "For what? For catching me when I fell, in every possible way." Philip's arms tightened around her. "I would catch you 1,000 times over, in this life and whatever comes next." And Eleanor knew it was true. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever joys or sorrows the future held, they would face it together. Two people who had started as strangers, united by an advertisement and fate and the simple choice to love each other completely. The music swelled, and Philip spun Eleanor gently, both of them laughing like the young couple they had once been. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced and celebrated, living proof that taking a chance on love, even when everything seemed uncertain, could lead to something beautiful beyond imagination. As the New Mexico stars blazed overhead and the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, Eleanor sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided her to that advertisement, to this man, to this life. She had come west seeking survival and found everything her heart had secretly hoped for but never dared to dream. And in Philip's arms, surrounded by the love they had built together, Eleanor knew she was finally, completely, perfectly home.